I think we're ready to start. I would just like to remind everybody that Dr. Gholam's presentation should go on for about half an hour, and that this will be followed by a question and answer session that I will be moderating. Let's begin. President Awad, members of the President's Cabinet, distinguished faculty members, our dear students and dear guests, on behalf of AUK, I would like to welcome you to the second presentation of the AUK Faculty Speaker Series. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I will briefly explain the aim of these presentations. The AUK Faculty Speaker Series provides a platform for faculty to showcase their research and scholarly pursuits. And it allows for our university to engage with the wider community, both within Kuwait and beyond. In this way, we hope to contribute to further dissemination of knowledge and hopefully have a greater social impact by welcoming the general public to partake in the AUK experience. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I would like to take time to thank our President, Dr. Rauda Awad, for her continuous support and unwavering dedication to making AUK a genuinely distinguished university in Kuwait. Thank you to my co-chair, Dr. Fatima Shibli, and I would also like to thank our colleagues in the PR department and Mr. Munawar Mulaji from the IT department for all his technical support as we set up this event. Today, we are very pleased to be hosting Professor Gholamreza Vatandoust from the College of Arts and Sciences at AUK, and he will be presenting a very interesting topic titled Beyond the Sharia, the changing concept of romance and marriage in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now I will be reading out Professor Vatandoust's bio. Dr. Gholamreza Vatandoust is a research scholar and former professor of Near Eastern Studies and History at the American University of Kuwait. I'm sorry, my thing has just gone down. He has served at AUK for the past 13 years. Prior to that, he was a tenured professor at Shiraz University, which is formerly known as Pahlavi University in Iran, where he was recognized for his outstanding scholarly contributions and was named a research fellow in the humanities. He twice served as the Giovanni Costigan Visiting Professor of History at the University of Washington in Seattle and was the recipient of the Getty Institute Fellowship. His book, The CIA Documents, on the 1953 coup and the overthrow of Dr. Mossadegh of Iran, Raza Publishers 2001, was named winner of the best book of the year. Another of his works, Selected Texts, a reference guide to the history of Iran, is now in its 9th edition and serves as a university textbook in Iran. Yet another co-authored work, Persian Women and Newspapers of the Constitutional Period, a portrayal 1906 to 1911, was published early in 2007 and published once again in 2009 and received the Best Book of the Year award in Women's Studies. The Meshkinfum Museum of Art was published in 2010, and his most recent co-authored manuscript with Shipari and Tavakoli was published in 2021 by the University of Yazid. His book chapters include Status of Iranian Women under the Pahlavi regime in Marriage and the Family in Iran, edited by Ashkar Fatih. The Historiography of the Persian Gulf, a survey of 19th and 20th century Persian sources in the Persian Gulf in modern times, edited by Lawrence Potter, Palgrave 2014. And Beyond the Sharia, White Marriage in the Islamic Republic of Iran, with Maryam Shipari in Iranian Romance in the Digital Age, edited by Janet Afari and Jessalyn Faust, Bloomsburg Publishing 2021. Dr. Vatandoust has served on the editorial board of several university publications in Iran, including the Pahlavi University Journal of Social Sciences and Humanities and History of Foreign Relations Quarterly. He is an affiliate of the Middle East Center, Jackson School of International Studies, and a member of the Middle East Studies Association of North America, the International Society for Iranian Studies, the Association for the Study of Persianate Societies, and a board member of the Iranian Archival Society. Dr. Vatandoust has published numerous articles in Persian and English, and his areas of interest are global history, the modern Middle East, Iran, gender, and the Persian Gulf. While Dr. Vatandoust will be moving on, he will also remain affiliated with AUK as a research scholar and former professor of Near Eastern Studies and History. We thank him for his services to AUK over the years, and we wish him all the best with his future endeavors. Dr. Gholam, we look forward to your presentation, and if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Salima. Thank you for your kind introduction. Can everyone hear me clearly? Everyone can? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Dr. Gholam, can I just
you.
make one suggestion? If everyone but can mute themselves, please, so that we don't have this echo over and over again, please.
Thank you, Dr. Tima. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are, because you know, I have colleagues, I know they're connecting from all over, including my own brother from Vancouver. So thank you for participating. I must admit that despite its repugnance, I am indebted to the coronavirus for this auspicious occasion, for without it, I would have been unable to reach out virtually to so many friends, colleagues, mentors, professors, and students across continents. So thank you and good riddance, COVID-19. I also would like to thank the American University of Kuwait, President Rauda Awad, who graciously extended the invitation, and to Dr. Salima and Dr. Tima, chairs of the faculty speaker series at AUK, for this very kind arrangement. I'm going to share my screen with you because I'm going to show some slides. So if you just bear with me for a second, I'll see if I can get it moving. Okay. My talk is beyond the Sharia, the changing concept of romance and marriage in the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is primarily based on a chapter edited and published in a volume by Janet Afari and Jesslyn Faust, appropriately called Iranian Romance in the Digital Age, from Arranged Marriage to White Marriage. My co-author in this work is my dear colleague and former student, Dr. Maryam Shaypari, currently Assistant Professor of History at Zahedan University. I know she's attending because I saw her a few minutes ago. I guess this should do for an introduction. I shall now proceed with the presentation. My talk, as you know, is beyond the Sharia, the changing concept of romance and marriage in the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is primarily based on a chapter edited and published in a volume by Janet Afari and Jesslyn Faust, appropriately called Iranian Romance in the Digital Age, okay? So I'm just going to go straight into the article. The 1979 Islamic Revolution of Iran was a significant event in global history for its overall impact on the existing international order. Iran was the first country in recent times that embraced Islam as a political ideology and put into motion a series of shock waves never seen before. The Islamic Revolution preceded the rise of Al-Qaeda and Islamic fundamentalism. It preceded the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the emergence of the internet and the mass media before the new millennium. The Islamic Revolution also arrived prior to the seminal works by Francis Fukuyama, The End of History, and The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington. In fact, it seems that Huntington was inspired by the Islamic Revolution, upon which he based his ideas of the rise of Islamic fundamentalism as the foreseeable force the West will have to deal with in the post-Cold War period. The clash of civilizations motivated Huntington to conclude that after the Cold War, the world is faced with the clash of civilizations. Huntington was the new Nostradamus of our age, who prophesied that religious and cultural fault lines were to be the next wave of civilizational conflict the West will have to encounter. This proved true, for shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, we see the extensive rise of nationalist and religious movements in the former Soviet republics and in Eastern Europe. The Islamic Revolution has also had a profound impact on Iran itself, particularly with the relation to social and domestic change. Iranian family protection law of 1967, which was considered liberal and Western in orientation, was abrogated and replaced by Sharia laws. Serious economic problems, unemployment, increasing poverty, political and social unrest.
Dr. Ghulam, we cannot see your screen. Are you sharing anything at the moment on the screen? All we see is a black.
Let me see. No, I'm not. I'll have to come back to the screen.
Okay.
At this point, I have to come back, so I haven't left it. Is it okay this way? Salima, is it okay to keep it this way?
The audience just commented that they can't see any slides. So if you're not using them at the moment, it's fine.
Okay. No, I can leave this and come back again to it. Okay. I mean, but I need to go back to my slides. I tried to minimize my slides, so it's mostly talk. When I show some statistics, I will have to share the screen with you. So I've just left and I'll come back to it again. The Islamic Revolution has also had a profound impact on Iran itself, particularly with relation to social and domestic change. Iranian family protection law of 1967 was considered liberal and Western in orientation, was abrogated and replaced by Sharia laws. Serious economic problems, unemployment, increasing poverty, political and social unrest, and rising expectations due to the information technology further aggravated the situation, leading to a gradual decline in the number of marriages and a significant rise of divorce. In between, what emerged was the concept of white marriage, where men and women voluntarily choose to live together in partnership without fear of social and religious stigma or prosecution. Since there are no registries for white marriage in government-sponsored notary public offices, the slate remains white and clean, undetectable for both men and women, particularly in large urban centers. While the government is aware of what it calls illegal cohabitations, it has been unable to turn the rising tide or prevent the practice beyond harsh threats and verbal condemnations. The official narrative of a legal marriage, both permanent and temporary, in the Islamic Republic is defined within the framework of Sharia laws. Consequently, the idea of white marriage does not fall under the legal definition of marriage, muta. However, new and unconventional lifestyles long since common in the West are now finding their way into the traditional and conservative Iranian society. In brief, the concept is best defined as consensual living of a man and a woman under one roof without having formalized the relationship and embraced the rituals that officially legitimize a marriage. Reasons for the rise of white marriage are numerous. Among these are the exorbitant costs of marriage. While marriage is generally expensive, separation and divorce are also a long and exhaustive process. It is the woman that must demonstrate she is entitled to a divorce. Her options are limited in that woman will have to prove that her husband is either physically abusive, has mental issues, or has failed to fulfill his obligations as a husband. This study is an inquiry into the social and political implications of white marriage and how it radically evolved in the Islamic Republic of Iran and became a social enigma across social classes. The research was both qualitative and quantitative in scope. On the qualitative side of the study, a lengthy interview was conducted with a young woman who was involved in a white marriage in Tehran, where she related her experiences living in harmony with her partner and finding the relationship mutually compatible. She, of course, regarded this relationship as temporary and hoped that it would soon change into a permanent relationship. The second set of interviews consisted of a roundtable session with a professional and well-educated women, all of whom were single or divorced, and that their views on white marriage was mostly positive under the existing circumstances. The third set included an interview with a small group of younger carpet weavers who belonged to the lower income group with little or no education. This group was both traditional and religious and were skeptical of living outside the wedlock. Finally, what followed was a quantitative analysis of a survey of 172, mostly young Iranians living both in Iran and Canada, on the question of white marriage. The study also sought to review and analyze the reaction of the Islamic Republic on the issue of white marriage. The trend was from initial denial to rejection and finally abject hostility and indifference. I'm going to briefly talk about the statistical part, the quantitative side. I've tried to minimize this and I'll show some of the results on graphs. So perhaps I should here go back and join in, connect to the shared screen so that this can be seen better. A study of 172 Iranian men and women, two similar sets of surveys were conducted in both Iran and Canada over a period of 6 months. The surveys in Iran included 70 women, of which 45 were from Tehran and 25 from other cities, while among the 52 men surveyed, 34 were from Tehran and the other 18 were from smaller cities like Shiraz, Kerman, Zahedan, and Bandar Abbas. The Iranian study group ranged in age from 18 to 55 and was divided into 3 age groups. The education level of those interviewed were also taken into consideration. The case for Canada was somewhat different. Total sample included 25 men and 25 women. All were residents of Toronto. Most interviewed were single. Most fell in the age group of 18 to 30, and the majority held a PhD. So you can see right from the beginning that we really didn't have a balanced study, but remember that the concept of white marriage and cohabitation is not common among uneducated or rural people. It's an urban development, and it's primarily among educated upper middle class, upper middle class. And now, of course, we are also finding people doing the same thing. So both groups were required to respond to 4 key questions, namely, if they approved white marriage, if they conditionally approved of white marriage, if they disapproved white marriage, and if they had no opinion to express. They also had the opportunity to elaborate their views in writing. The findings are present in 3 graphs. Now, this is the first graph that you see. It shows that the total number of those against white marriage is significantly higher in Iran than in Canada. Ironically, the numbers of those who agree with white marriage are also significantly higher in Iran, whereas the number of Iranians in Canada are about the same. However, both groups in Iran and in Canada are ranked equal relative to the conditional acceptance of white marriage, which shows that the idea is really, the concept is a social phenomena, has nothing to do with just orientation, even though there are people both in Iran and in Canada regard white marriage as haram because of their religious convictions. Now, graph 2, let me see graph 2 for you.
Dr. Ghulam, Munawwar is asking you to activate your camera, please.
Oh, my camera is not activated? I'm sorry, yes. I didn't know that. Okay.
We can see a very handsome picture of you.
Okay. Sorry about that. You should have told me sooner. I apologize. Okay. Graph 2 demonstrates the educational levels of surveyed Iranians in both groups. In Iran, those who most disagree with the concept of white marriage have a university degree equivalent to a bachelor's degree, followed closely by those who agree. The pattern repeats itself from groups with higher education, master's or equivalent. However, there is a significant difference of opinion among Iranians in Canada. Those who conditionally agree to white marriage, followed by those who disagree, rank highest, and they all have MA degrees and above. Perhaps this is due to the fact that the survey was skewed, as I mentioned earlier, from the beginning, where most Iranian Canadians fall into a higher educated group. The people who responded to the questionnaire were mostly students of higher education, PhD students, or just about finished. So they were of a small group, but we should also remember that many recent immigrants to Canada happen to go for education. They often have a PhD or close to a PhD, and then they do not return, so they stay in Canada. So if you look at the data available for Iranians in Canada, the educational level is quite higher than the national level. Now, graph 3, which is, here is the graph 3. Okay, we have graph 3 here. Graph 3 provides the distribution of age groups and their opinion to Iranians and Iranian Canadians. Okay, let's see. A major difference in this section is that the majority who disagree and the majority that agree in Iran fall in the lower age category. 18 to 30 years, and the percentage is high, whereas in Canada, while the age group 18 to 30 remains the same as Iran, the majority conditionally agree to the idea of a white marriage, followed closely by those who agree. In both samples, the numbers that conditionally accept white marriage are significant. In general, the following observations can be drawn from the surveys and interviews conducted. For those engaged in a white marriage, most agreed that there was a general sense of satisfaction in the relationship and that their long-time goal was marriage. They also agreed that there was no real difference in a white marriage from a traditional one. The only difference was that the first was not registered. In this relationship, couples seemed to support each other, and many of the immediate family members became aware of the relationship and did not interfere directly. Based on the 172 interviews, one can divide the views of men and women across Iran into the 3 general categories. One group is opposed to white marriage, a second group conditionally accepts it, while a third group supports white marriage. The first group that opposed white marriage saw no permanence and stability in the relationship. This group accepted the idea of a white marriage, but on conditional terms. So long as society is unaccepting of such a relationship, it should be avoided to stay out of harm's way. Under this conditional acceptance falls yet another group that accepts white marriage, providing it is temporary, to know each other, to resolve financial issues, and to pave the way for a permanent relationship. They view white marriage as a pathway towards a permanent relationship. The third and final group is the one that is in total acceptance with no conditions attached. Now I'm going to go ahead and briefly talk about the government's reaction to white marriage and the social impact of white marriage, and then I will conclude the talk. According to official Iranian statistics covering a 19-year period, 1996 to 2015, the divorce rate for 2015 amounted to nearly 24% of the total marriages, about 1 in every 4 marriages. The divorce rate for urban centers was almost 25% and for rural areas 12%. In comparison, less than 2 decades earlier, 1996, divorce for the entire country was 8%, with urban centers ranking at 9% and rural areas ranking at 4%. The increase over the 19-year period until 2015 was 33%, which is significantly high. And I never got to check again today, but we know that the divorce rate is also on the increase. These statistics shocked Iranian authorities. The conservatives blamed the West, pointing at Western and global influence, particularly the internet. And since 2009, the Iranian government initiated a moral policing force to regulate the homes of single people in central Tehran to discourage cohabitation. But this, like many other threats, was a failure. Almost all those engaged in white marriage had university education. For those who had not experienced divorce, this was an initial step towards a permanent marriage, to know one's future partner. To engage in a white marriage, the couple would have to rely primarily on themselves for financial support and could not expect assistance from their parents. In such an arrangement, traditional rules and mores no longer applied, and both sides were fully involved and were equal partners in the process. The Islamic Republic continues to remain in a state of perpetual self-denial, as evident from lack of information on white marriage. For many young couples, freedom from parental intervention is perhaps one of the greater assets of a white marriage. Both sides end their relationship at short notice. There are no expectations on either side, and the economic liabilities are minimum. What makes a white marriage different is that the commitment is neither contractual nor permanent. Either partner can end it at will. In an interview, some women respondents claim that women tend to have greater independence in this form of lifestyle. No longer do they need to bear the responsibilities or commitments of a married life. However, the negative consequences of cohabitation for women are far greater than for men. Women can have no legal recourse in cases of abuse. They are more apt to seclude themselves from family and friends for fear of shame and humiliation, and they have far more to risk than their male counterparts. For women, it is a lonely path, and it could be costly. White marriage is on the rise. When asked what they dread most in a white marriage, many express social and legal concerns. A young man expressed fear of how his immediate family would react once they discovered his secret, which they regarded as moral degradation. This would cast a shadow not just on him, but his entire family. The second more serious outcome of a white marriage, particularly for a woman, is to become pregnant. The stigma is not just on the couple, but on the child born outside marriage. Normally, the child is not issued a birth certificate and will therefore lack legal support, including registration in school. In instances where financial matters are involved, it is predominantly the woman that bears the brunt, since neither side can litigate matters in a legal court of law. It is often the woman who must compromise, for she has no case against a partner who does not legally exist. In a misogynistic society, women. Perhaps one of the negative outcomes of a white marriage is the spread of polygamy, so long as women are willing to live with married men without registration of the relationship. According to the present existing laws, a man is required to have the consent of his first wife to marry. A female interviewee listed the advantages of a white marriage. Apparently there is an advantageous side too. Despite fears and concerns, she said, she claimed that women feel more independent. Such a relationship does not have complications of a married life. She recounted that the only advantage of a white marriage is that it is like a room with an open door. Whenever you choose, you can exit, and no one will stop you. What is important is that you recognize that the door is not shut upon you. Marriage often gives you the feeling of a closed door. When you decide to open the door, you need to see who holds the key. What if you are not granted the key? What will you do then? You know, there are a lot of women all over the Middle East who want to leave the country or who want to travel or other issues. And if their husband disapproves, for them to do it. Men, on the other hand, have much less to lose. In a white marriage, men do not have to pay for expensive weddings or for dowry, mehriye, as stipulated in a marriage contract. Men in general are more receptive to a white marriage than women for obvious reasons. Women tend to insist on changing a white relationship to a formal one. Women pay a higher price and are legally and socially more susceptible to physical and emotional harm when the relationship goes wrong. Consequently, women suffer more in Iran and other Islamic societies where the social and religious bonds are strong and individuals can be ostracized and severely punished for relations outside the traditional codes of conduct. We have finally reached a conclusion. I have some slides to show with the conclusion, but because of the problem, the issue we have, I'm going to just present the conclusion and then I will show you the slides because some of those slides might be interesting. They're not very many, but I will show you individually once the talk is over, okay? Thank you. In conclusion, we can draw upon two hypotheses based on the data from the 172 surveys conducted in Iran and Canada. The first determined that Iranian men and women do not have similar views on white marriage, whereas men and women in Canada do. The second hypothesis tested the views of single men and women separately, and the results showed that in Iran and in Canada, the distribution for both were compatible. In other words, it shows that it's the social pressures that determine the idea, whereas in Canada, the people who have no restrictions, they have exactly the same ideas. In other words, they still have these cultural ties and so on, and perhaps religious ties, which makes them think alike. We can thus conclude that based on our samples, men and women in Iran, in comparison with Iranians in Canada, have similar perception on white marriage. This finding is significant, for it demonstrates that at least those surveyed in Canada have similar concerns as those in Iran. From opinions expressed, very few of the respondents looked upon white marriage from a religious perspective. On the contrary, most were concerned with its social and cultural implications in Iran today. The Islamic regime has often alluded to white marriage as black marriage and presented the issue within the broader context of a conspiracy or fitna. However, this is a simplistic view to say the least. The current economic woes associated with the sharp devaluation of the Iranian currency since 2018 is a testimony to the ongoing problem. In a broader context, white marriage could be a reaction to the partial failure of women's rights, such as marriage, polygamy, and divorce. But despite all setbacks, women have also witnessed an incredible progress of women's intellectual and cultural achievements. Most educated urbanites in Iran see marriage in practical terms. There seemed to be a general consensus that a white marriage is no different in commitments than a real marriage. In several cases, particularly some divorcees, preferred this relationship and had no intention of changing it to a permanent one. The women interviewed all have their reasons for not insisting on a traditional marriage. They fear that there is no social compatibility among their families, or that their partners are in no position to be able to engage in a marriage where they need to make serious financial and social commitments for which they are unprepared. Cohabitation generates a more equitable relationship for both partners in comparison with a Sharia marriage. For instance, one girl interviewed confessed that she has no obligation to take her partner's shirts to the laundromat or to cook for him. And when she did, he was always grateful. So that's a positive side. Views on traditional marriage still continue to remain strong, both among Iranians in Iran and abroad. Women who contemplate turning the relationship into a permanent marriage are primarily those who desire to have children in the future. Like most Middle Eastern societies, the Islamic Republic is grounded on gender inequality with discriminatory laws that assume women are in need of caretakers. However, Iranian women have come a long way in recognizing the difficult road ahead and in realizing that they themselves need to be agents of change. After several setbacks, women came to realize that gender equality and democracy are inseparable, and that they need to promote democracy and civil rights to further their cause. As Azadeh Kian, an authority on the subject, a feminist scholar, eloquently puts it, Iranian women are increasingly well-educated, marry later in life, have fewer children, and more aspire to the equal sharing of responsibilities with men. Indeed, Iranian women have proven themselves to be symbols of resilience and equal rights in Iran and the Middle East. Thank you very much. I'm done with the lecture. I will try and get those few slides ready for you, but I will leave it to Dr. Salima to come in and tell us what to do. Dr. Salima?
Thank you, Dr. Gholam, for a very interesting presentation. We are ready to begin the question and answer session. I would like to ask our participants if they have a question for Dr. Gholam to kindly just raise their hand, and I will try to call on each and every one of you. I have seen Dr. Mohsen, my colleague. He has a question. Dr. Mohsen, can you please unmute yourself from your side and please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Gholam, for an excellent presentation on a very, very controversial item. And I wonder why they called it white marriages. It should be called maybe trial marriages. And it does exist all over the world.
You know why? I have it in my article, Dr. Mohsen. I also mentioned it at the beginning. It's called white because you don't register it and you don't have any evidence that you're married.
Yeah, but
and this is very important, particularly
Iran call it black marriages now. But anyway, that's not the issue.
Yeah, the government calls it black.
Yeah, but let me just indicate something. The whole marriage institution is under question in the world today, especially in the West. I would just suggest this is a very big global problem. And I hope a follow-up study will see how to deal with this problem, because there are many legal implications here, especially for women. Women, yeah, maybe they gain independence, but they are losing a lot, especially if there are children involved in this case, what legal rights they have. I guess Bill Gates would have loved to have white marriage in case of this situation. But I think it is a problem globally, not only in Iran, and it's on the rise in many parts of the world, even though it's probably not as announced as in some countries. But how to deal with it and how to solve it, because it is a result of social changes that has been taking place in recent decades.
Are you asking me the question how to deal with it and how to solve it? I think I'm going to show you some other slides which actually shows in the clubhouse now. There are several chat rooms, which actually, here it is. I can show you this one. There are several chat rooms which are actually, I'm translating it, white marriage in and outside Iran, good or bad. You know, this I took this picture just a few days ago. There are quite a number of chat rooms on this concept. And what's interesting, it's being conducted in, across continents. Many participants are in Iran, and they are, if you notice, they are girls without hijab. Yeah. Which shows that, the women in Iran are in a more or less are brave enough now. I mean, they can actually openly on camera, speak on the issue and be without hijab. And their discussions are very interesting, And what you suggested, Dr. Bernit, that there should be a follow-up. Actually, we are thinking of this. Dr. Shepari and I, we are thinking of a follow-up study in a couple of years, because already I would say our data is old. We collected our data in 2018, and then there were very few people who were willing to be interviewed, even though they were having a relationship in the form of white marriage. They were afraid. We had to gain their trust. But now I think it's going to be much easier, and we'll have much broader data to be exact. So certainly we are thinking of continuing this, and it's a topic of interest to many people concerned. And so if I go back here and show you this slide, again, this slide is it's a book by Mary Jane Walker. I'm not, the book is a travel log. It's a travel journey. So it's a travel book mainly. So it's not academic, but what she writes here is extremely important. And if you get a chance just to read this about everything goes on in Iran, and like probably most of the Middle East, everything is available in Iran, from drugs to liquor to everything, but it's all underground. I mean, this is actually, she's as a traveler, she actually went to these places. And then, if you look at this book, which is by Nina Ansari, she's of course an author and historian. She has a book on Jewels of Allah, the untold story of women in Iran. I found this interesting reading. It's relatively, not fully academic, but relatively academic. And she says everything that is forbidden, from dancing to drinking to sex, is practiced underground. What is remarkable about a generation born and raised in this climate is that they do not reflect the conservative laws. I mean, so the young people, I mean, is living a different life. And this different life, which was underground, is now surfacing more and more because, as you mentioned, it's hard for the government to control it. And for Iran, it's even easier than the rest of the Arab world, because if the moral police, they have such a thing as the moral police, if the moral police, checks in on them and goes to their apartment, they can claim they are married on a temporary basis, what we call sigha, on a temporary marriage. Temporary marriage is acceptable in Shiism. So for their own protection, they can always claim they have been married, on a temporary basis, and the law allows that. And interestingly, you don't need to register that either. You don't need to have a certification that you are married on a temporary basis. So this
Thank you, Dr. Gholam. Excellent answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question that I can answer?
I would like to go in order. Abrar?
Yes, thank you. You are responsible. I apologize.
No, not at all. Abrar, please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Ghulam. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It was so insightful, and this is such an interesting topic. I thought it was interesting that you looked at a number of factors that may be contributing to this particular phenomena. You talked about convenience primarily from like an economic standpoint on one hand, and then on from a social standpoint on the other, not having to merge the families, so to speak, and therefore be able to just think of each other as individuals and equal partners. But I'm also wondering, just to kind of build off of Dr. Mehsen's point, to what extent do you think, or whether any of the participants had mentioned in the interviews, that there is this sense of losing faith in the idea of the institution of marriage. I definitely agree with Dr. Mehsen that there is more of this perception that marriage as an institution is, by definition, one that doesn't necessarily promote equality between the two partners. So I'm wondering to what extent that's happening compared to the factors you mentioned, such as economic convenience and social convenience. How much of it has to do also with the idea of losing faith in the institution of marriage altogether?
Well, among Muslims all over the Middle East, and I would say particularly in Iran, women feel this discrimination very much so. And they have felt it, especially since the revolution, because there is a forced hijab, and there were a lot of restrictions, limitations. There are not just only economic problems, but there are also problems with if you get the wrong person, you marry the wrong person, it's so difficult to get yourself off. I mean, to just get your child, they don't even give you your child, so the custody of children and so on. I would say even for men, at least from the interviews we had, I think people want stability. It's not that people do not want stability, whether it's in Iran, whether it's elsewhere. And women in particular, they want security and stability. They want to have a family. They want to have children. Men too, also. I mean, most men do. There's no question as they get older. But the problem is, I've seen so many young men in their 40s, and they say, how can I marry? I don't have a proper job. I don't make enough money. There is no way I can afford a wife. I can't even afford to support myself. This is a big issue in a country where unemployment is unofficially above 20%, maybe 30%. And the salaries are low, inflation is rampant, it's very high. So I think the social and economic side is very important. For women, of course, especially educated women, the laws are important too. Women have been pressing to change the laws, at least to a fair level if they can. They are pressing. The women's movement in Iran is a very lasting one. It's been going on for years. By the way, the first time I spoke at AUK 13 years ago, when I was invited here, my first semester, I gave a talk on the women's movement in Iran, and I'm ending it now with another article on women. So I think the women in Iran have made tremendous progress, considering that it's a religious, ideological regime they have to deal with. I think they've made wonderful advances, but there are lots of issues that has to be resolved. It's not going to be done overnight. But I am hopeful that in the long run, change is inevitable. And partially because of mass media, the internet, the world is changing. So as I mentioned, look at the clubhouses now, that the chat rooms that are going on, and they're all about problems regarding marriage, regarding family, regarding white marriage. I was very impressed by the conversation that was going on. I was extremely impressed, and I think this is going to kind of hasten the process without any question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghulam. Salim, would you allow me a quick follow-up question?
Please
Thanks
go
so much. Dr. Ghulam, one of the things you had also mentioned was the fact that children born into these white marriages or out of wedlock, so to speak, also aren't given birth certificates, and that would in turn also prevent them from enrolling in school. I'm wondering, does that also effectively make them stateless? Do we have
that's a good question. It does, but fortunately, I should add that just recently, there is a move to give, because there are a lot of Afghan children, there are a lot of Afghan laborers in Iran, and many of them have been living there, they're married, a lot of them to Iranian girls, and they have been having problems with their children having a birth certificate so they can go to school. So they have changed the laws and made it possible for these children to be registered as Iranians, even if their fathers are Afghans, so this is already changed, but it's kind of difficult to do it, but it can be done. I've heard that people also who have children out of wedlock, they can go ahead and request for a birth certificate so long as they can identify who the father is and so on. Yeah, it's beginning to change because there is no other way. It has to be dealt with. Initially, it was a taboo, and now it's changing, and it will change, unquestionably.
Thank you so much.
Professor Dale, welcome. Can we have your question, please?
Once I unmute myself, I will ask the question. First, a comment, Professor Vatandoust. My compliments on an excellent presentation. What struck me was two things that not everyone else is doing that I found very helpful. One is the comparison with what's happening to Iranians in North America, mostly Canada and Iran. And secondly, to the longitudinal or social historical time involved in which, as you indicate, attitudes and legislation, as you just indicated in a response, are absolutely changing. Here's my question. Well, you make, and everybody makes, the general statement that women are having, despite the best efforts of legislatures and legislators, in some cases, to improve the status of women. Your colleague, our colleague, Fariba Adel-Kah, currently enjoying house arrest in Tehran, made a very interesting, to me at least, point in the late 1990s. And that is that because women were restricted in various ways in the public sphere, they could do more in the economic sphere. For example, in the black market, in international smuggling, and in moving goods around, because the regime simply wasn't prepared to acknowledge the really dynamic role of women as traders. So on the surface, women would appear to be put down or let's say deflected from the public sphere, likewise in expressing themselves in public. So she would indicate that a large number of women would use male pseudonyms so that they could get published. And a lot of people would know what they were doing, but the regime was not very active in pursuing it. When you're talking about marriage, it would seem as if there's less latitude for women, as you've been saying. Or would you say that white marriage is a similar way of getting around formal public restrictions in which women could have quite a latitude to do things just as they have in, at least according to Adel-Kah, the economic sphere? Sorry for the long question.
No, thank you. It's a very, very good question. I think it's a combination of both. First of all, women in the 1990s, by the way, my heart weeps for Fariba Adel-Kah. I know her from a distance, I've been corresponding with her before she was arrested, and she's an excellent academic in France, and she made the mistake of going back to Iran, and as a dual citizen, she was arrested. So that's for her. But the thing is, the times have changed. Right now, in the early years of the revolution, actually women agreed to voluntarily wear the hijab. It was a sign of protest. It was a means of showing their dislike for Western influence, for, they considered the Shah at that particular time as the puppet of the US. And so it was a reaction to the United States and the West. But it was done voluntarily. But as time went on, they came to realize, no, this is being used against them. And they are expected to stay at home. They are expected to be obedient to their husbands. They can have several, her husband can have several wives without any problems. I mean, and they started fighting for it. They started fighting for their rights, particularly the educated women. Today, educated Iranian women, they say, well, listen, I'm educated. I'm maybe even more educated than my husband. I do not need to have his consent to go to work. Actually, we have an excellent lady, professor at Tehran University, who said the same thing. She was a member of the parliament. She was also a professor at Tehran University. And she said this, she said, don't you think I should not need to get permission from my husband to go to work every morning? I mean, she was being sarcastic, but this is actually, the husband could prevent her legally. Of course, she has a very good husband, very educated one, but legally he could. So this is a question that, yes, women have actually now, with the divorce rates the high as they are, in many, many families, the women are the main supporter. So women become, they have coined a new expression in Farsi called zane. It's called not be sarparast, but khod sarparast. In other words, a woman who is in charge of herself. She doesn't have a qayyim. She doesn't have somebody to take care of her. She doesn't need one. I mean, this is a sign that she is independent. So this is coming, this expression is becoming in more use. There are so many families, divorces, where the woman is really the breadwinner and supporting her children, and she's doing it very well. I mean, this is proven because, by the way, there are more students in the universities that are women than it's like 60% are women. And by the way, if you want to see discrimination in reverse, there was a time some years ago where more women were getting into the medical school than men. And so the Majlis, the parliament, changed the laws and said 50-50. 50% men, 50% women. Don't you think that's nice for men? Discrimination against women? I mean, because it's a very competitive to get into the medical school, and women were more 60% of the students passing the exam to get into the medical school were women. So they reduced it down to 50%. So there is discrimination. I mean, there is no question about that, but I think the old school is losing the battle in the long run.
Thank you, Professor Dale. Do you have any more questions or comments?
No, thank you very much for an excellent presentation, Professor Vatandoust.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Idlecoin. Salima, may I suggest, right above you on my screen is sitting Dr. William Floor. He is one of the top authorities on Iran. He's waving at me. I consider myself his student. I mean, he's always been my mentor in so many ways. So I think others should also come in. We have such great colleagues, outstanding scholars attending this session. So I would really appreciate if they come in and participate and share their opinions.
I was trying to keep the order. So Farah, I do apologize from you. I will take Professor William and then I'll take you next. Thank you for your patience. Professor William, please.
That is very kind of you. I've been waiting so long to finally talk to you all. Anyway, Gholam, good to see you. And thanks for a good talk. I think very stimulating, and it will stimulate our brain, or at least what's left of it. You know, as two remarks as far as the book by Ansari, who says, you know, all this drinking, sexing, and whatnot is happening on the ground. That was always the case. The difference is that it has now become, I would say, a major exercise, and that is partly due to the increase in wealth, and partly due to an increase in education, and partly due to lack of opportunity because of religious constraints, which in the past also led to all these activities going underground. And if people are interested, they can read about this in my book, Persian Pleasures, how Iranians relaxed through the centuries with drinks and opiates. Secondly, I heard that you said you were, after your retirement, do another set of fieldwork. I would suggest that not only do you look at white marriage, but also about especially women who choose not to marry at all. I know a few in Iran who basically don't want to marry at all, want to be totally independent and live independent. Doesn't mean that they don't have sexual relations, by the way. They do. Their family, at least the ones I know, the family knows about that. And it is not necessarily that they have a fixed relationship with one partner. They may have sometimes even more than one partner. And that's a field of research that has not been looked into in detail. So those are my two cents of wisdom. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy your retirement back in Shiraz, where I hope to see you one of these days.
Thank you.
Farah, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me? Hello.
Hello.
It's an honor to be here, Dr. Gholamreza. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for the presentation. Also, I'm very honored to be amongst great professors like everyone in here and doctors. My question might not be as good as everyone's, but I would like to ask about, you mentioned the advancements that women made in Iran, and I would like to know what can we adopt as women in the Middle East and learn from Iranian women and implement today.
Can you repeat the last part of your question? I'm not sure exactly what the question is about women. What should I answer, please?
Well, you mentioned that there
could you repeat the last part? Yes.
Can you hear me?
No. You were cut off for a second. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, I was saying that there were advancements that you mentioned made by Iranian women, and I would like to know what we can adopt from Iranian women and implement here as the rest of the Middle East that does struggle through things that you have mentioned in your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's a very good question. I don't want to by any means give the idea that Iranian women are perhaps any different from women in other countries in the Arab world or in the Middle East. I don't want to give that impression, but I should mention is that because women, since the 1979 revolution, women in Iran have really had to fight for every step of the way. They had to fight for it. They had to prove themselves to be equal, if not better than men. They had to struggle, and they also did not have that financial support which most Arab countries, especially the wealthy ones, have. You know, so women, it doesn't matter if women don't work in many countries in Kuwait. they are supported. But in Iran, no. I mean, women, they have to support them. They have to support their children. They have to find a job, and they need to know that they are no less than. I think this competition, this sense of competition, has been a factor that has raised their position in the world stage. Women are excellent students. I mean, they know that they have to work hard from day one. You know, I mean, they know that they have to stand on their own feet. They know that things are difficult. They have to also be able to support even their parents if need be. And they are very hardworking. You know, I mean, again, I'm not trying to be biased, but I would say as students, they're extremely hardworking students. You know, I look at students I had at Shiraz University. You know, I was very fortunate. I had a group of outstanding, brilliant students who worked 24 hours a day if they could. Maybe because of the competition, because they had to prove themselves so good, to be so good, to be employed, just simply to be employed. And type of pressure, which I don't think is necessarily, you know, they're under constant pressure, not only women, men as well, by the way. The Iranian society is under such great pressure with inflation above anywhere between 20 to 40%, you know, certainly above 20%, the decreasing value of their currency and so on. They are facing difficult situations, and that tends to make people tough, but also it can, you know, create a lot of psychological problems, which I think it has, you know, because they have been under such pressure. You know, the sanctions have done terrible things for the society, terrible things, and there is extreme pressure. So simply, you know, I mean, people, if they are just hoping that things will change and life will go back to normal, to the days that Dr. Flo remembers more, you know, when it was nice and quiet, and Shiraz was regarded as the city of nightingales and flowers, and people would just be drinking tea and reading poetry. You know, that's no longer possible. You know, it's not that way anymore.
Thank you, Farah, for your question. Mr. Mohammed Faghfouri, if you can unmute yourself from your side, please.
Salam, Dr. Vatandoust. It's so good to see you. It's wonderful to see you. And I actually should thank Willem for bringing this event to my attention. I wasn't aware of that.
You're welcome.
But thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I have one short comment and two very short questions. My comment is that to what extent white marriage is studied by other people in the field? I have a student who is already herself a very established scholar. She did her PhD dissertation with me a few years ago, and she's an Iranian female scholar teaching in Sweden. Now she's trying to settle in the United States. And I wanted to see if I have a permission to connect her to you so that she would share some of her findings with you, and also you would share so much experience you have in the field with her. That is my question, number one. And the other two questions is that it is important to compare attitude toward white marriage inside Iran and compare that with white marriage attitude among Iranian immigrants in Canada. But probably more important it is to compare the attitude about this phenomenon in different parts of Iran. I'm pretty sure attitude of women and men, families as well, would be very different in Tehran than say in Tabriz, in Kurdistan, Azerbaijan, and other places. And that probably would be a lot more important to study in continuation of this research. Now, my two short questions is this. One is that, first of all, did you ever come across any data to see what percentage of these marriages end up in pregnancy? Number one. Number two, did you find out what the length of average life of a white marriage is? And thank you again for a wonderful presentation, and good to see you. I'll unmute myself
Thank you,
now
Dr.
and listen.
Fakhoury. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you after so many years. And I'm grateful to Dr. Floor for giving you the connection. To answer your question, foremost, yes, you can give my email, my address, and so on to the colleague you mentioned. If I'm not mistaken, did she write a book on marriage laws in? Did she write a book on marriage laws in Iran?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
Yes, I've read the book. Yes, I've read the book. It's quite good. Thank you. Yeah, I've used that book. It's a quite good book. I don't remember because it's a Swedish name, but I've used it and I have the book and I appreciate that. I was very interested to see that she had done a good job. Obviously, working with you is the reason.
Well,
okay, now to answer your two questions, unfortunately, you're right, and this is a discrepancy that we faced, and we made it very clear in the article to mention where we did the research and what in the tables I have within the article. The article is 24 pages, so I couldn't really cover most of the material, but we do have data where these people interviewed come from. And they're of course limited to the major cities, Tehran primarily, and then of course, Shiraz and Zahedan and other places. Of course, you're right, and this has to be done, and this was a shortcoming in our part. But remember when we started doing the research, it was actually 2017 initially that we started, we had to really be careful, especially my colleague, Dr. Shaypari, who's in Zahedan, which is a very religious conservative place. She had to be very careful who she talks to. People were afraid. People are always, in authoritarian states, they're afraid of speaking freely. But the people we were able to interview, we know that they were honest with us. But then there were people who were engaged in white marriage. They did not want to actually get involved, even though we were able to offer them some premium, a small amount for those who were willing to talk to us. But it became difficult. It was difficult. So what you are suggesting is correct. We hope to make this corrected in the following research as things open up. Now, with the chat rooms available, the Clubhouse, I think perhaps we can even collect our data by engaging people in this conversation in the future without having to worry about any kind of retribution. I think that's what we have to do. Now, concerning your second question, no, because we didn't have time to follow these cases, because we collected the data over a 6-month period in 2018. So it did not give us time to go back and follow up. But if we can do a follow-up on these people, if we can, I'm not sure we can, but if we can, we will certainly do so. But the topic is becoming easier to do research on, mainly because some people have written theses on it, including in Iran, but they're very superficial. Some of them are extremely superficial. The ones in Iran, master's degree, students of master's degree in Iran, there were quite a number of theses that we found, but we didn't use them. They were not very useful. They were very subjective and opinionated, so really rely on them. And so I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nasser, can we finally have your question? I know that you've been waiting very patiently.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have a comment, and first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Professor, for your dedication. It was a tremendous honor and a privilege to be a student in several of your classes over the last 4 years. I gained valuable information from your experience in the field. Professor, I have a comment. Since 1979 and the revolution, don't you think that collective consciousness played a role in this, in the white marriage? Okay, we understand the economical role in this. We also understand it is the lack of regulation from the moral police. But don't you think everyone is doing it? Why don't we do it? The collective consciousness, and not to mention that 60% of the population in Iran today is below 30 years old?
Yes, of course, what has helped this collective consciousness, and we could also say historical memory, is the social media. There is no question that the social media has made people brave enough today to come and chat about the issues of marriage, divorce, white marriage, and so on, simply because it's possible to do so. I mean, they have nothing to fear. Even if they want, they can switch off their camera and they will not be seen, you know, I mean, if they don't want to be seen. And besides, today, there are so many changes taking place over Iran that these issues are not as important. It's not predominant issues facing Iran. I mean, Iran has so many other issues to deal with that, you know, they no longer fear a bunch of young people living together or some old professors like Dr. Fakhfouri or myself going back to Iran. I don't care about us. There was a time we were dangerous. I think even Professor William was could have been regarded as a threat. You know, Professor William Floor, he several awards in as writing, you know, as the best authority on Iran from the Iranian government. But I don't know if they'll give you another one, Dr. Floor. Do you expect another one coming from them? You know. but so things have changed, you know, changed tremendously, and it's changing because the government has so many problems to deal with. And really concerned. You know, about this ideological, it's of course an ideological issue for them, you know, but they can't stop and they can't change it. So they are just ignoring it. I mean, the best thing to do is ignore it.
Dr. Gholam, somebody from the participants sent me a message in the chat, and they said that Professor Mary Hegeland would like to say a few words. I don't know, this was quite some time ago. I'm not sure if she's still there and would still like to comment.
Professor Hegeland, are you online? Yes, there she is.
I am still here, and I don't see how you're raising those little hands, but anyway, I guess I would like to say something. Thank you so much to the person who did that. It's really wonderful to have this wonderful privilege to see you all and to have communication from around the world. I appreciate it so much. Dr. Wilhelm Floor, who has of course published so many brilliant books on Iran, had made the suggestion to study independent women. And actually one of the articles in the book that we have just published, from arranged marriage to white marriage, is about independent women. Dr. Masarat, who lives in Tehran, wrote an article about independent women. So those who are interested in that may like to see that. We're going to have a program at the American Anthropological Association conference, hopefully by several, around a table, by several of the people who wrote articles in this book about the challenges of doing research in Iran. As you all know, it's very difficult for outsiders to go to Iran and do research. And as you know, very sadly and unfortunately, some people of Iranian background who are living and working in other countries have gone back to Iran and become arrested. So it's very difficult, but it's also very difficult for people who are Iranian and live in Iran to conduct research, because many topics are so sensitive. And so I wanted to ask Dr. Vatandoust, how did he get in touch with people who are in this rather still sensitive situation of being in white marriages, living together basically cohabitation. How did you go about doing your research? What were your strategies to find people to whom to communicate, especially people who were in white marriages? How did you do this? How did you and Mariam Khanum Dr. Mariam, go about doing this research?
Well, I should give the entire credit. I should really give the entire credit for the field work to Dr. Mariam Shepari. I mean, she was absolutely great. As I said, she was my brilliant student, and now she's an academic, and we have done quite a lot of work together. She, being a professor in Zahedan and having a good network of students and friends, Iranian women in Shiraz, in Zahedan, and some of our students coming from different cities. So she was the one who interviewed these people. And of course, we came up with a strategy of what questions we should ask, and she diligently did that. That was her prime contribution. With interviews in Iran, we had another colleague who did it for me. And she was able to, for a long over an hour interview with this person who was living in a white marriage. And she managed to gain her trust and do it. And she was extremely good. So we had to do it as a teamwork. And in Canada, it's my honor, again, my privilege to introduce my daughter, who's a PhD student at the University of Toronto. She's on site. She was on camera when I started. I don't know if she's there. Gholamreza Vatandoust, if she's there. She's the one who did the research at the University of Toronto. She is the one. While I was visiting her, she was kind enough to have it done, because she has a very good network of Iranian students at the and that's what she did. So I had to use, and I've mentioned that, we have thanked all these individuals in the article, by the way. And they're all there in the first footnote that we provide. Their names are there, and they were most gracious and helpful. And apart from that, I mean, we would never have been able to do it. And we wanted a much larger sample, but we were told by specialists that this is an acceptable sample. 172 individuals were acceptable. Knowing the bias that it holds. I mean, we haven't gone to villages to interview them, interview anybody, obviously not to the rural areas. This is a urban research, primarily but we had the age groups in 55, so the age groups were covered quite broadly. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much. This is such fascinating and crucial research. Thank you so much, Dr. Vatandoust.
Hussein, can we have your question? Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. So maybe we take the final two questions, perhaps. Hussein, you have also been waiting quite some time.
Yes,
please go ahead.
Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Dr. Gholam, for this very much, and I hope to be attending more of your talks in the future. I know you're going into retirement, but I mean, you would leave AUK at 3 a.m., so I can't imagine what you would be doing now with all the time that you have. Professor, I have two questions. First one is, in Iran, is it difficult for, let's say, Sunnis to marry Shias, or for Muslims to marry non-Muslims, or the other way around? And if so, is this one of the major, let's say, motivations to why white marriage is being more accepted recently in Iran? And second question would be, if it was made easier, what I just spoke about, and if, for example, laws such as a man being able to stop his wife from working, if divorce was made easier, if it was more empowering for women or less disempowering for women to get into a marriage, would that stop support, or would it decrease the momentum that white marriage is gaining in Iran?
Those are nice questions. First of all, we have to separate what the government does, what it prefers, how it discriminates from the public. When I was teaching in Shiraz, or even when I was a student there years ago, this marriage between Shias and Sunnis were quite common. Quite common. I mean, my mother, I remember she would tell me that her sister had married a person who was a Sunni, and they had a wonderful family. So in other words, this was more common before than it is now, perhaps because the government tends to separate people, discriminate against them, unfortunately. I mean, we have to recognize that, and that might prohibit some people from marrying across these lines more so. I don't have statistics, I cannot prove it, but I can see people would be more reluctant to marry. But there are so many Kurds, for example. Kurds are essentially Sunni, a lot of them are. And I know so many Kurds who are married to Iranian girls, and I'm sure that a lot of them are Shia. So, I mean, this has never been an issue among people unless they're extremely religious and they think this is wrong. I'm sure that there are people with that attitude as well. Your question, yes, of course. I think if economic pressures are, people find they have jobs, if they feel they can afford a family, I think most people are like each other. I mean, people would like stability in their lives. I mean, don't we all want stability? Now, in a place, in countries in the West, perhaps this is not an issue. Marriage itself may not be an issue. But because marriage is an issue in the Middle East, and it is an issue in Iran, I think, yes, I think people would be more willing or would want to have a marriage, you know, which is blessed by both sides, both parents, both families, and where they can have a home of their own and so on. I think most people would want that rather than just, you know, choose to live with one another. Remember, our societies are still very much family oriented. Our societies are, you know, and so more traditional, more family oriented. So the role families play in our lives are quite significant. So most people know that and they recognize that. And in many instances, people refuse to marry simply because they know their families cannot come to terms. One is, you know, from a rich class, one is from a wealthy class or an educated class, one is, you know, doesn't have much wealth, much education. So there is reluctance about getting married. If the economy improves, if people have the options to choose, I believe, you know, I don't have exact data for it, but I'm sure that people would want stability. And you could see that many questions that we asked, why don't you get married? Almost most of them, I would say all, would say, well, because we can't afford it, both men and women. We can't afford it. And you would ask, well, why are you living together? They said it's more economical. I mean, that's another factor too. We like each other and we want to get to know each other. And it's also more economical for us, especially in Tehran.
Dr. Gholam, I'm sorry to disrupt this discussion, but some members of our senior administration have a meeting to attend to, so I need to call the presentation to an end. But before we do so, we would like to take a group photo. Dr. Tima will be taking a group photo, so if you could kindly unshare your screen, and then we can take a group photo. Those of you who do not want to be in the photo for whatever reason, it's okay, you may switch off your cameras. Thank you all for your participation. This is the last presentation for the spring semester before we begin our summer break. We will be back definitely in October, hopefully when we're back on campus, and the faculty speaker series will continue. We hope to see you all once again, and thank you for your participation. Have a good evening.